The craziest match of the year didn't happen in Penn State versus Michigan or Iowa versus Wisconsin, which is why you probably missed it. Over the weekend, a lot happened. We're talking that crazy dual meet, Penn State's insane new freshman, and the wild Hodge Trophy race. In this week's headlines presented by the Wrestling Consultant. Now let's stop stalling and get on to our first wrestling headline, which is that this was the craziest match of the year that you probably missed. And yes, this did happen over the weekend with Virginia Tech and NC State. While that duel was absolutely bonkers wild, the wild upset duel meet was Bryce Andonian versus Ed Scott. I'm going to get to that match, but first I have to give you a little bit of background on this duel meet because this was an attendance record, nearly 6,000 fans at Virginia Tech for this dual meet. I love seeing that because this dual meet has just grown over the years. Head coach Tony Roby actually said he wants to thank everybody who came to the dual meet. It's been one of the most fun and loud atmospheres they've ever had in the Coliseum. Absolutely incredible, and they were so excited to have NC State in there. Now, of course, you may know that Virginia Tech actually beat NC State. This was, depending on which rankings you're looking at, this was an upset, this wasn't an upset. For my consideration, I'm considering this an upset just because this is a rivalry that has grown tremendously over the past couple of years. NC State won last year, Virginia Tech won this year, and it did end up coming down to the wire. One of the key victories that happened during this dual meet was actually from Andy Smith beating Isaac Trumbull at 197 pounds. This pretty much propelled Virginia Tech to a victory, and it honestly puts them in a good position to win the ACC. But the thing that we really have to talk about was at 157 pounds. This was the most wild match I have seen the entire year, possibly ever. I mean, this was a classic match between these two wrestlers. We know how wild Ed Headlock Scott is for NC State and how insanely electric Bryce Andonian is. These two go upper body and they just don't have a care in the world. This match started out like insane in the first period. That's the only way I can honestly describe this match because it was like 10-zip from Bryce Andonian, who went upper body, tossed Ed Scott to his back. As you saw, this was very early on in the match. And then Scott came back, tossed Andonian to his back. Got back points. It was like 10-6 within like a minute and a half, 2 minutes into the first period. Well, Andonian ended up stepping it up later on in the match. He ended up getting a couple more back points and ended up winning this match 24-10. It was nearly a tech fall by the end of the match, which was just insane to me. I mean, I was expecting this to go back and forth. To be honest, I was expecting it to be more like 24-22 or something, rather than Andonian just stepping it up that much. The insane part is, well, first of all, Ed Scott, props to him for not giving up the tech fall at the end. He knew how important that was in this match early on. But this was Andonian's debut this season. Yeah, he did wrestle at the NWC All-Star Classic. He did wrestle in an Open last weekend. But this was his dual meet debut of the season. He said, "Thank you, Hokie Nation." This is on Twitter. "You are unmatched. Broke the attendance record. Felt amazing wrestling with my brothers. Not a fan base, but a family. Let's keep it rolling." And I'm so excited to see this because it was just a lot of fun. These two, Scott and Andonian, actually have wrestled in the past before. Andonian won both times, 11-6 and 9-5, which is actually going to get to a bit of my takeaways. But you got to love the Virginia Tech and NC State. Like, they just go back and forth. And let me know, is this your favorite rivalry in college wrestling? Other than Penn State versus Iowa, I know that's a lot of people's favorites. You may be a fan of Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma or Iowa State versus... But this rivalry here is easily one of my favorites. I mean, just look at the absolute, like, just malice that these two have for each other. My takeaways here is that Bryce Andonian has stepped it up. And if I am anybody at 157, I am afraid of him this season. Like I said, he went from a decision over Scott to nearly teching him. I mean, he has jumped levels from high school to college. And he was looking, actually, throughout his high school career at a couple schools, from Michigan to Virginia Tech, but he ended up choosing the Hokies for a reason, but how did he end up there? The recruiting process can be difficult, and whether you're going D1 or D3, you have to figure out how to talk to coaches and when to visit campuses. And the hands down best way to navigate the recruiting process is by talking to an expert with real knowledge in this space. Former D1 head coach Teague Moore started the Wrestling Consultant to help parents bridge the gap from high school to college wrestling. If you're currently going through this process, I'm sure you have a ton of questions just like I did when I was in high school. To start getting those questions answered, you can start a free introductory call by going to thewrestlingconsultant.com. Direct links to everything and Teague's contact information is in the description below. Thanks to the Wrestling Consultant for sponsoring this video. And that leads to the second wrestling headline, which is that Penn State just squashed Michigan. Now, this dual meet was supposed to be, I don't know, relatively close, at least a battle. Last year was supposed to be like down to the wire, but 2 years in a row, Penn State absolutely squashed them. Except for the bookends of this match at 125 and heavyweight, it was nearly a blowout. I mean, Penn State had upset after upset, especially for the freshmen, which is the main story here that I have to talk about because Penn State's freshmen are unbelievable. This started with Shane Van Ness getting a major decision at 149 pounds. And yeah, RBY and Bo Bartlett won, but I really want to focus on the freshmen here because that's going to be key going into the Iowa duel on Friday night. Now, Van Ness impressively had over 4 minutes of riding time that he accumulated. He ended up winning this match by major decision 14-4. Not an upset, but a good dual meet victory. The other guy that we just have to talk about here is Levi Haynes, the true freshman who has come in impressive fashion this season, and he wrestled Will Lewan, who at the beginning of the season was and still is a contender to win a national title at 157. Now, as you see there, this match went into sudden victory where Levi Haynes ended up getting the takedown to win over a number 10 ranked Will Lewan. Earlier in this match, I believe it was in the third period, he almost earned a takedown, but that ended up getting taken back, which I understand, and he still had to fight through that. Now, in this sudden victory, I don't know how Lewan didn't end up getting the takedown on him. He has just impressed me like tremendously is Levi Haynes, and he's going to be a key player if he comes to Iowa to wrestle, or if he wrestles against Iowa next week. And there's actually a couple bit of things that we have to talk about. But first, let's talk about Alex Facundo, because Facundo ended up being Cam Amin, and we know how tough Cam Amin is. A top, I believe at one point was number 1 ranked guy or not number 1 ranked guy, but a top 3 ranked guy at 165. Well, Facundo and Amin ended up going to the sudden victory, to the ride out period, because there was a first period takedown that Facundo got. Amin fired back with a takedown on his own. It's 5-5 going into those tiebreakers, and what ended up happening is Facundo won based on the riding time that he had. He earned more riding time, and he won the match. So he has showed that he is just level with these guys, and Penn State has stepped it up with their freshmen as usual. But what is to expect here other than Penn State freshmen just dominating in the regular season and possibly going into the postseason? And I don't want to say anything premature, but these guys are honestly looking to be All-Americans. Now, before I talk about one thing that's crazy happening with Levi Haynes, we have to talk about the big upset that happened. And I mean, maybe you don't call it upset, maybe you do, but Mason Parris took out Greg Kirkfleet to take that number 1 spot. You see Flow Wrestling reporting here at 285 pounds. This was the second victory that Parris has had over Greg Kirkfleet. Kirkfleet still leads this series 3-2, and they're probably going to beat two more times this season. I mean, of course, I'm not counting out like a Anthony Cassiope for Iowa in the Big Tens, but there's a likely chance that these two meet up at Big Tens and NCAAs. Penn State, of course, ended up winning against Michigan and then against Michigan State. But the big question that Flow Wrestling poses, will Penn State burn Levi Haynes' redshirt against Iowa? And you may be saying, well, didn't Levi Haynes already wrestle this year? Yes, but the thing for the true freshmen is that they are allowed to now use 5 dates of eligibility. Levi Haynes has already used those dates of eligibility in his dual meets this season. So if he wrestles against Iowa on Friday night, you can expect him to wrestle for the remainder of the season and into the postseason. And if he comes in as a true freshman with All-American potential, I think we're going to see some excitement for Penn State in the postseason. Now let's talk about some quick wrestling headlines right before we talk about the Hodge Trophy race, because we have some big-time contenders. Some quick headlines here is Illinois beat Maryland, not an upset, but a good victory showing that they are dominant in the Big Ten and one of the top teams along with Northwestern, right outside those top few teams with Iowa, Penn State, and Michigan. Now, Arizona State earned a nice victory in the Pac-12, 25-14 over Stanford, until they ended up losing to Cal Poly 19-18, an impressive victory by Cal Poly. Another thing that happened over the weekend is the Chippewa Challenge between all of the Borelli coaching tree with American, Campbell, Cal Bakersfield, and Central Michigan. Well, American ended up winning the Chippewa Challenge 19-18 in the finals against Campbell. They won this dual meet series event down in Bowie's Creek, and they won each of their dual meets by like just a point. An impressive turnaround, and that's what head coach had to say too, because it was an impressive turnaround from last year to this year against some top-ranked teams. Now, Iowa, of course, I love this headline, thrashed Nebraska 34-6 on Friday night with Spencer Lee in absolute dominant fashion. They also had a nice win against Wisconsin 19-18. And yes, this one came down to criteria, with Iowa winning only because of match points scored. You see some of the box scores here with Spencer Lee pinning Eric Barnett. We'll talk about Spencer Lee in just a second. Brody Teske coming back. We'll see who starts for Iowa at 133. Roe Woods had a nice victory. A impressive victory here, of course, was Max Murin and Austin Gomez. Gomez ended up beating Max Murin in impressive victory. But probably the most insane victory here was Tyler Dow at 184 pounds, pinning Abe Assad. And this is what helped Wisconsin get to that nearly able to beat Iowa here. And he pinned him. It was just crazy. I mean, it set the environment by storm. Now, the third wrestling headline here is that the Hodge Trophy race is heating up tremendously, and there are three key players here that I want to talk about. The first of these, of course, that you just saw pop up on screen is Spencer Lee. Pure domination you see from this tweet, and what an impressive weekend for Spencer Lee. I mentioned in the Nebraska and the Wisconsin duels, he did have pins, and you see this tweet from Iowa here. He pinned Liam Cronin in the first period. He pinned Eric Barnett in 438. His last 4 wins, okay, his 4 wins, pins over the number 9, number 3, number 7, and number 6 in the country. And I'm honestly tired of hearing like, well, 125 is weak. These are the top 10 ranked guys in the country, and Spencer Lee's going out and pinning them in the first period. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and I don't know if I've ever seen somebody been this excited about Spencer Lee, about a number 1 guy just dominating week after week, making headlines week after week. Spencer Lee is that guy. And I love to see it. I mean, look at this pin here. He just takes Cronin straight to his back, and that looks absolutely painful in this Nebraska duel meet. Then he goes out and he does the same thing against Eric Barnett. He did it against Michael DiAugustino. He's not just beating these guys. He's dominating them. He's pinning them. And this is what Spencer Lee actually had to say on his pins when he was asked about it.
Get a guy in a position to put him away, then you got to put him away. And that's what we preach, and that's the plan, was to wrestle hard for 7 minutes. So
he said you got to get him in a position to put him away, and you got to put him away. And that's what he's been doing. And I love seeing that. It's obviously helping out his teammates. So he's the first player in the Hodge. The second one is Roman Bravo Young of Penn State, who had his 45th straight dual meet victory, not dual meet victory, but actually match victory as he continues his streak, because between his 45th straight win and Spencer Lee, I believe, his 48th straight win, he is a real contender. Now, do I think these two are going to wrestle in the Penn State and Iowa dual meet? No, I don't think it's going to happen. But Roman Bravo Young has 8 bonus point wins this season, only 1 decision against Dylan Ragusin, which, yeah, Dylan Ragusin came out fire and ended up getting a takedown on Roman Bravo Young. But between his 8 bonus points, between Spencer Lee's insane bonus point victories, and then the third player here is Yanni Giacomahalis, and I know Yanni did have a loss this season to Austin Gomez. But he does have 8 straight wins since that loss, with wins over Pinheiro Johnson, Kyle Parko, Caleb Henson, all impressive players. And interestingly enough, those are a lot of newer guys in this space. He does have 5 bonus point victories, and he's going for his 4th title. And I think it's between those 3 guys, because RBY, his senior year, going for his 3rd straight title. Yanni and Spencer going for their 4th straight titles. It's hard to say who to choose, and I don't know that we're going to end up with a tie as we have before. And yes, of course, there are some outside contenders. You have Carter Starachi going for his 3rd straight title, has impressive bonus point victories. David Carr, Keegan O'Toole. And you got to remember that a couple years ago, Gable Steveson and Spencer Lee did tie for the Hodge Trophy, and I think we could see it again. And my takeaways here is that Spencer Lee, I think, is the contender to win that Hodge Trophy. He is that number 1 ranked guy. And I actually don't think we're going to get a tie this year. I think if Spencer Lee continues to pin, wins his 4th title, he's going to end up winning that Hodge Trophy. Now, if you want to see who the best Iowa Hawkeye wrestlers are of all time, I recommend that you check out this video here. And if you think Spencer Lee is going to win the Hodge Trophy, why don't you hit that subscribe button? Those were your wrestling headlines.